Friction is the resistant force when an object is pushed to slide over a surface. For example, we have an object and it is pushed by a force going horizontally in that direction. There will be a resisting force, which is the force of friction going in the opposite direction. Now, the formula to compute the friction is equal to the coefficient of friction times the normal force. The normal force is the force perpendicular to the surface. Now, there are two kinds of friction, static friction and kinetic friction. So, static friction is friction at rest and kinetic friction is friction in motion. So, friction at rest is always higher than friction in motion. For example, we have this object. We are pushing it on horizontally. So, the friction will be static friction. When the object starts moving, the static friction will be replaced by kinetic friction. So it will initially be harder, but once it's moving, it will be easier to push because the static friction is replaced by kinetic friction. Example 1. What is the force required to move a 10 kg mass object on a flat surface with a coefficient of static friction of 0.6? So for example, this is your object, and we need to compute for the normal force. So the normal force will be equal to the weight of the object. So the normal force is equal to the weight. So weight is the mass of the object times the acceleration due to gravity. So the mass is 10 kilograms times the acceleration due to gravity 9.8 meters per second squared. So 10 times 9.8 is 98. So kilograms times meters per second squared will be kilogram meters per second squared. So 98 kilogram meters per second squared is also equal to 98 newtons. Now next we compute for the friction force. So the friction force is equal to the coefficient of friction times the normal force. So 0.6 times 98 newtons is 58.8 newtons. So this is the friction force. So the force we require will be slightly higher than this friction force in order for the object to move. Example 2. A force of 30 newtons is applied horizontally on a 2 kg object that has a kinetic coefficient of friction of 0.2. What will be the acceleration? So let us assume that the object has started to move and 30 newtons of force is acted on it. Now first we need to compute for the normal force. The normal force for this particular example will be equal to the weight. So weight is mass times the acceleration due to gravity. So mass is 2 kilograms. Acceleration due to gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. So 2 times 9.8 is 19.6. So kilogram meters per second squared becomes newtons. So now we know that the normal force is 19.6 newtons. Now we can compute for the friction force. So the friction force is equal to the coefficient of friction times the normal force. So the coefficient of friction is 0.2 times the normal force of 19.6 newtons. So the friction force is 3.92 newtons. So this is the friction force acting opposite to the direction of the force. Now the resultant force will be 30 newtons minus the friction force 3.92. You will have 26.08 newtons. So now we can compute now, since we know the resultant force, we can now compute for the acceleration because we know the mass of the object. So the resultant force, which is this one, is 26.08 newtons multiplied by the mass of the object, 2 kilograms, times acceleration, which we don't know yet. So we convert now newtons into kilogram meters per second squared. So we need to solve for A. What is with A is 2 kilograms. So we need to divide we need to divide 2 kilograms on both sides. So we divided this one by 2 kilograms. We divided by this one by 2 kilograms. So 2 kilograms and 2 kilograms will cancel out. The kilogram here will cancel out with the kilogram here, leaving only meters per second squared as the unit. So 26.08 divided by 2 is 13.04 meters per second squared. This will be your acceleration of the object.